And our next speaker who will give a keynote address is Mr. Claude Turmes, who is the Minister for Energy and Spatial Planning of Luxembourg. Claude Turmes was a member of the European Parliament from 1999 to 2018. He was the Vice President of the Parliamentary Group of the Green Party in the European Parliament and was a member of the Committee on Environment, Health and Consumer Protection. Also, he was a member of the Committee on Industry, Energy, Telecom Research. He was a rapporteur on a large number of the European directives, in particular on renewable energy, energy efficiency, the electricity market, climate plans, as well as on the European Lobby Register. Minister Turmes, welcome to Davos Energy Week. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you. You're on mute. Your microphone is not working.
Good morning. Good morning. So I see you have a nice snow coverage behind you. And unfortunately, we are not in Davos itself. So maybe next year. So energy efficiency is our number one policy and has to be our number one policy in the age of climate change. Renewables is, of course, gets much more media attention. It's much more sexy. As a minister, you can cut ribbons. Whereas energy efficiency's problem is it is not really visible. But we have to make it visible in IEA scenarios and all other climate net zero scenarios. Energy efficiency is always the biggest share of everything. So we have to be aware energy efficiency is even more important than developing renewable energies. Then, of course, comes the question: how do you?
Media interviews, you insisted on the European governments who have climate action more, that European governments should be taking climate action more seriously and accelerate energy transition beyond what you call the Brussels bubble. That means you believe the European Union's commitment to emission reduction is not sufficient enough to tackle climate change. Why do you think so?
I think that interview probably was when EU was still at 40% 2030 reduction. Meanwhile, it went where I always have advocated after Paris, which is Europe's share needs to be at least a 55% CO2 reduction. And on energy efficiency, EU has today a target of improving its energy efficiency versus business as usual of 32%. That is not sufficient. In my own country, we have a 40 to 44% energy efficiency improvement, and that is also what Europe needs. And then, of course, comes the question, how do we implement energy efficiency? The first and probably the most important is standard setting. So at EU level, it was in the 2012 Building Directive where I was successful to introduce for Europe the near zero energy standard for new buildings. And in Luxembourg, we have the strictest new building law of all EU countries, and that allows us to build zero CO2 houses, not only at the level of residence for housing, but also in the office buildings. And that is a prerequisite in Europe, but I think even more in those countries where there is much more new build than in Europe. Of course, then on building, it's about renovation. That is a decade-long difficult exercise. We need more innovation. We need 3D. We need pre-built. And we need a lot of finance to get this done. Then the next important thing is data centers. Digitalization is important to get us to climate change. Integration of renewables into the power system. Without digitalization, not possible. Digitalization can also optimize, for example, the efficiency of buildings, of industrial processes. But digitalization is a problem as long as data centers are so inefficient. So after a 2 years fight, I now finally got EU Commission to work on standard setting for data centers in Europe. And we have a promising new technology, which is immersion cooling. And immersion cooling will allow us to build more compact data centers and to build them in the city centers and use the heat for cooling or heating of whole areas. But be aware, data center is a global problem, and we need to really advance on that standard setting. One of my ideas for Glasgow, for the climate conference end of the year, would be that EU and US, Japan, who are probably the three continents or countries which have done best on standard setting, the Japanese with the top runner approach, that the three of us join forces to help other areas, other continents like Africa or South America to have as sophisticated standard setting bodies and mechanisms, because that is a quick win, especially for emerging economies. Then over to mobility. I think in mobility, it's about model shift. And on mobility, the fact that batteries are now much cheaper allows us to go very fast into electromobility, and that is a huge efficiency gain. A diesel engine has hardly an efficiency of 15-18%. An electric car has an efficiency of 60% plus. So that is a 3 to 5-fold efficiency gain. And electromobility will not only happen in cars, it will happen in vans, and it will happen in lorries, also because electricity or battery electric is so much more efficient than hydrogen. So even trucks, at least in Europe, will go largely electric, and we have to, of course, prepare this efficiency gain also by upgrading the grids. Last thing where we are working a lot in Luxembourg is industrial efficiency. Industry now needs to develop zero carbon roadmaps, and what we have in Luxembourg is we have a whole arsenal of instruments. We have a voluntary agreement for those industries who have lower power prices because of global competition, and this voluntary agreement forces them to do energy efficiency investments. And we have an obligation on the gas and electricity retailers to invest into efficiency in industry. So we are organizing a bit of a marriage between power companies who have knowledge on efficiency, who have longer return of interest rates and times, with industry which often has not always has in-house energy efficiency expertise and has very short return of rate obligations from their shareholders. And so we have a real success story on that model, and we are now complementing it by a de-risking fund, also in order to allow third parties to have enough capital to invest large scale into the improvement of energy efficiency. So that's a bit roughly our plans: housing, standards plus renovation for all kinds of appliances and especially data centers, going to immersion cooling as fast as we can, mobility over to electromobility because that's so much more efficient, and then of course also doing a whole, I would say, a more public-private partnership approach for the efficiency in industry.
Thank you very much. Now I have a question for you, Mr. Minister. Given your previous experience of working in the European Parliament, when you were actually working on many directives, which you now, as part of the government of Luxembourg, have to implement, do you see a difference in your sort of modus operandi of how you actually operate? Because on one hand, when you were part of the European legislature, it was this is where you were designing those policies. And now when you are on the side of implementation, do you see any challenges or discrepancies in this respect?
Frankly, no. for every national minister or minister who is in charge at the national level, it's so much easier if you have a strong, tough European directive. Why? Because imagine a country like Luxembourg. Our critical mass for certain technologies is so small. So even if I would do a law that, let's say, we want very efficient refrigerators, the refrigerator industry would not start to have super efficient refrigerators just for a country which doesn't even have 1 million of inhabitants. So Europe is really the right critical mass for standard setting and for pushing a whole economy into the right direction. Also, the banking system. So why would banks just in Luxembourg or the financing sector just in Luxembourg get interested in energy efficiency if the whole rest of Europe wouldn't do it? So EU is the right level. US at federal at US state level is the right level. And what is great now is Africa, where you had a country like Tunisia, who was really a front runner on energy efficiency, for example, for air conditioning, banning cheap air conditioning, cheap inefficient air conditioning. What happened to Tunisia? There was so much black market and smuggling of cheaper, inefficient devices into Tunisia that the whole policy of Tunisian government, which was a good policy, broke down. Now, African Union is starting to work on standard setting. And that is much more promising than if each and every African country would start to work on standard setting. And I think it's my hope that we as EU, maybe now also with the new US administration, that we help, for example, Africa with our 15, 20 years of standard setting experience, and that we create something like a global, at least, network of regulators who do the standard setting. That is the quickest, biggest contribution which, for example, Glasgow could do for raising energy efficiency worldwide.
Good. Now I have sort of a global question for you. Joseph Biden, whose inauguration took place yesterday, his first executive order that he signed was about America's return to the Paris Climate Accord. And since you were the first senior level minister today that we have any conference, I would like to get your comment on this.
Biden is great. I can't even imagine having had another 4 years of Trump. For the world climate, I think that would have been a real blow. And with Biden, not only him as a person, but also carry the whole knowledge of really climate dedicated people in this government. I basically sometimes I have the impression that life is good to us and that in important moments the right things happen. And the right thing was to get this Biden administration into the game. And now what I'm also trying to do with other European ministers is that we will try to link with the Biden administration, especially on this issue of standard setting for efficiency, maybe linking the EU trading system for CO2 with the American. And then a third question, which is very, very important, is those economies who move now fast into climate change need to have measures to prevent dumping, for example, from steel or other global products. So another area where I think we should work together with the new American administration is a border adjustment mechanism for those continents or economic areas which have a Paris-compatible climate policy. And so that's 3 areas. And the fourth one is also because US is such an important financial actor, is building up de-risking instruments for energy efficiency investments and also renewable investments, grid investments. And going back to Africa, the problem of Africa is not that they have no sun. The problem with Africa is that the financial markets for a solar investment in Africa, despite the fact that it has a higher harvest of sun than in Europe we have 0, 1, 2, 3, maybe a maximum of 4% of interest rate when we invest into solar. And in Africa, you have 16, 18, 25% of interest rate to pay for the lending for a solar device. And that is an area where EU and US should put money on the table to have de-risking instruments to help these kind of emerging economies which are penalized by financial markets. And so that's the four things where we are now starting to work with the Biden administration.
Good, great. And our final question will be about COP26, which will take place in Glasgow this year. What, in your opinion, would be the most desired goal that has to be achieved there, and especially what needs to be done in preparation for that international meeting?
I think it's declaring climate urgency. We have lost too much time. We have, I think, at best 10 years left to get drastic reductions. So I think Glasgow needs to be, one, we are in climate urgency. That has to be a top priority from now on in each major economy all over the world. And then two, it's about the end game. The end game is zero carbon, and it is about a carbon budget. The problem of climate change is a volume problem. So if you are there, it's not about flying with a huge parabol to zero, but you need to get steep down, not basically down with a lot of meanwhile emissions. So that's my ask on climate change, or our ask on climate change. And then I really hope that we can get up and running a global network of regulators who work on standard setting for appliances, for data centers, for new buildings, for new cars. I think that is such a big and relatively easy to organize climate mitigation or climate reduction.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for taking your time to join us. We look forward to cooperating with you in the future, and we wish you a productive day today.
Thank you very much for having me. Enjoy your day. Thank you.